So today we're going to turn to our first, what we call a terrestrial fly. A big name for something that we all know. This will be like a beetle, a grasshopper, an ant, anything that really typically lives on the ground and not in the water, but occasionally falls in the water. So today what we're going to do is we're going to tie ourselves up a flying ant. And we will be using some foam for the body of this fly. The big kind of lumps on the front and the back, and we'll use some dubbing in between. We'll use a couple hackle feathers to be the wings on a flying ant. And I think that's about it. I think I mentioned the dubbing, but we will be using two different colors of thread for this particular pattern, and I've just kind of hodgepodged this one together based on some other patterns that I've seen. And I'm going to take this thread pretty far down deep around the bend of this hook. You can tie this on a straight hook as well. This is a kind of a curved hook, kind of more like along the lines of a scud hook. And the reason we're going to change colors is because we're going to do this kind of more along the lines of the kinds of flies or the kinds of ants that I see around here, that, are quite often, the larger ones anyway, are going to be a little bit more orangey up front, and a little bit more black in the back. So we're going to start out with, and I've already pre-cut this. This is just a piece of foam that we're going to use for the back end of the fly here. And it's really just cut out of this. Usually when I make my cut for the foam I'm going to use, I'm going to measure it to about the gape of the hook right there. But from there I kind of round things down a little bit, thin them out a little bit as well, because I want to try to decrease bulk as much as I possibly can. So I'm just going to kind of hold this here in place with my fingers, and I'll take that kind of first wrap there. I don't want to pull it too tight. You can actually cut right through this stuff, but you don't have to be incredibly weak with it either. Just gotta need to find that happy medium spot, and sometimes it can be a little bit hard to catch it. So I'm kind of turning it to the side to see if it's far enough down as far as where I want my body to start. It's getting pretty dang close there. So we've got that like that. The nice thing about foam, obviously, is that it's very stretchy, which means that I can now tighten that down, and it's not going to be as bulky as what it might have looked like from the start. Okay, so I've got that. I want that straight over the top of the hook so that I'm going to be able to take this and bend it like so, to form the abdomen, I guess, of the ant. So I'm going to bring my thread back a little bit. Right in here we're going to tie in a little bit of black dubbing, and I'm actually going to be using a little bit of ice dub UV in black. We're going to build ourselves up a kind of a football shaped abdomen here that our foam is just going to go over the top of. So here's my dubbing, and like usual, just kind of stick it there on my thread. I'm going to spin it in my fingers until I've got myself a decent rope of dubbing there. I may stretch that out a little bit so we can go a little bit further. Wouldn't be surprised if I add a little bit more here, because that's just something that I do. So I'm going to turn my vise a little bit just so I can make sure I get all the way back down to the bottom or the base of where that foam is tied in. And I don't want that to be very thick. I do want it to be kind of thin in order to get that more of that kind of oblong football shape. And I'll just continue to tighten this a little bit. I'm going to take this up to about as far as I want this body to extend, which is going to be right about there. So we've got ourselves a nice dubbing body going here. Not nearly as football shaped as I want, so I'm going to add a little bit more dubbing. And when I put this stuff on, this next batch on, I'm going to try to not do too many wraps here at the back of the abdomen or at the front, mostly in the middle, to help me build up that kind of bulbous football kind of shape there. I'm going to stretch that out a little bit. So we've got ourselves a nice little dubbing rope going on there. So again, I'm going to try to stick most of these wraps right there in the center and not do too many wraps going from this end to the other end. And you'll see that we're starting to build ourselves up a nice kind of a football bulky shape there. Now I'm going to put just a tiny little bit more. Always remember, a tiny little bit of dubbing goes a long way, and what you guys can see on the camera here ends up looking like a lot just because I have a pretty decent macro lens on here. So I'm going to turn that back up towards me just again so I can see it. Makes it even harder to see when it is this kind of a color of black. And I'm going to be good pretty much with that. Me being me, I'll probably come in and, not probably, I am. I'm going to come in and clip off a couple of those longer pieces. So I've got a nice little puffy back going on there. And from there, I'm going to take this piece of foam that I've already tied in here, this black piece, and I'm going to fold it right over the top. I'm going to get a thread wrap or two on that, and then I am going to kind of stretch it a little bit tighter. Okay, so now I'm just checking to make sure, do I have that pretty much where I want it? I'll go ahead and give that a bit of a stretch. That's just going to help me, so I'm tying a little bit less material here in the middle, because that's, an ant is going to have kind of that kind of a lower space valley in the center of it. Touch up a couple of spots here and there that look good on my side, but probably can't see anything on your side. Okay, so I've got that tied down fine, just nicely, and I'm going to just pull this foam backwards, and let's get a couple of thread wraps on the shank of the hook here. I don't mind going up to the eye here. I'm just looking for something to help me get that solidly put into place. I'm going to stretch this again as I cut it. Again, just trying to keep as low of a profile on that middle section as I possibly can. So from there, we're going to go ahead and clean up that butt end a little bit. I'll just take a few thread wraps forward. You'll note that it locks itself down pretty well. And with that, I'm actually okay with the way that that's setting right at the moment. So we have an ant butt, or abdomen. I'm going to go ahead and whip finish here. So giving myself a little bit of extra thread. Okay, here we go. We're whip finishing here. The reason you won't always do this, you do a black on black pattern. You use a whole lot of different varieties. In this particular case, because I'm tying it the way that I see some of the larger ants around here, is a black and orange. I'm actually going to cut off and remove my thread at this point. And that will give me the opportunity to move over to a new color. And I'm going to use this kind of a rusty orange color. And I'm switching it now because I want this center piece that's going to be right in here, very small, but right in there, I want that to be orange, or this rusty orange color. So we're going to go ahead and take our thread, and we're going to kind of start just as if we were starting brand new on a new hook that doesn't have anything on it. Wrap our way backwards, pulling it fairly firm as I go back. Not so much that I'm going to break it. It's not nano silk, so it will break. So I've got that kind of where I want it. And go ahead and turn my vise sideways so I have that nice view of that thread when I come in here to give it a clip. That thread is now secure. It's now on the vise. I'm going to take a few wraps back and forth here, not to build up any bulk, so you want to be careful. I'll probably spin my thread a little bit counterclockwise just to widen it out a little bit. All I'm doing here is trying to make sure I get that orangish color showing through. But if I put too much bulk on it, then you're not going to see the difference between the abdomen and the head of this fly. So again, right here, I'm just trying to add that orange color to my fly. Okay, and I'm okay with the way that that's looking right there. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to tie in our piece of orange, which is, and I'm looking for some other colors of foam. Again, cut just plain and simply out of a piece of foam here that you can get at any fly shop. And I've already mucked around with it in terms of getting it to a point so it's easier to tie in. I try to thin it out up here as well so I don't get quite as much bulk. You're going to want to be at least somewhat cognizant of what you're doing here, because if I tie this in right up against the back end there, then I lose that middle dip of a segment there, which I do not want to have happen. So I'm going to try to be a little bit judicious with my wraps. I do want to make sure that this is in place and over the top of the shank of the hook. Because I'm going to now fold that forward just a hair, not to stay there by any means. And then I'm going to be looking for my hackle feathers. So at this point we're going to go ahead, because it's a flying ant, we're going to tie in our feather, and I've already prepared a pretty small done hackle here that you should be able to see. And I've got it prepped by, I've pulled off the curlies or the fluff at the end. I'm going to want this feather to kind of lie over the back of this fly and just beyond the butt section there. Not too far, but just a little bit. And I'm just going to pinch that just like that to hold it into place. And we're just going to take a thread wrap or two here just to lock it down. Just like so. So just a couple of wraps there. And then hopefully you can see we've got one of our wings in place, and if I want them to poke up a little bit more, I can go ahead and reposition them a little bit right here. Then I'm going to reach down and we'll get the other feather that I prepared similar to the last one. I've got the stuff, the fuzzy stuff taken off here. I'm going to give my thread a counterclockwise spin just so I make sure that I'm tying that nice and up. Okay, that should be sufficient. The key here with this wing is to, number one, get it on the other side, but number two, try to get it pretty close to the same length as that other feather that I just tied in. So we don't have an ant that's got some weird stuff going on where one wing is longer than the other. And so here we go. We're going to just take a wrap here, or two, or three, and I'm going to check for length here. In this particular case, that length is way too long. So I'm just going to pull on the stem that's sticking out past the eye of the hook. And you want to be really careful here, because it doesn't take much of a pull before your material is just out of control. So I will spend a little bit of extra time here just to make sure I've got those where I want them, and I'm pretty okay with where I have those right at the moment. So I'm going to just go ahead and take a few more wraps here to lock those down. I'm actually going to take a wrap back here behind my foam as well, just like so. So now we've got ourselves our flying ant that at least it's got its 2 feathers in place with the orange foam sticking up. And I'm sure you can figure out what comes next. We're going to go ahead and come on in and clip out those stems on those hackle feathers. This one's closer to the bottom, so I'm going to go ahead and rotate my vise upside down here. Again, being fairly delicate because I don't want to pull any length. Suddenly have my feathers being very dissimilar to one another, which is not what I want to have happen. Okay, so I've got that. I've got that in place. I'm going to pull my orange foam back a little bit, and we're going to go back a little bit more just so that I have a tiny bit more to make a head here. And on this one, obviously the abdomen is much larger than the thorax. So we're going to put some dubbing on, and I'm just going to use some eye stub UV in cinnamon here. And this time we're going to need a lot less because we've got just a tiny little space to work with. And the fact that the head of an ant, if you can even see it at all, is very, very small. So I'm going to be very judicious with my dubbing here, more than anything else. Rather than like a football shape here, we're going to be going for just a nice ball of dubbing right here behind the eye of the hook. So I've got my dubbing on, and just pull that tight a little bit for a couple of these last wraps, just like so. And there you have it. I've got a nice little bulbous head. I'm going to pull my foam over the top. Going to be careful here because I want to make sure that when I tie this off, I'm tying it right behind the eye of the hook, and not off the end of the fly in some other bizarre direction. I can pull that back. I can see the eye of the hook. I can actually take a few wraps here. I'm going to take another couple of wraps right here on top. Make sure everything's sitting about where I want it to sit. We'll adjust our wings up a little bit. They got a little bit lowered when I went through that process. And now that I've got that in and I've got it really pretty good and secure, I'm going to come back with my scissors again. We're going to pull this material fairly tight again so that it'll kind of suck back into the thread wraps. Just like so. And then I'm just going to take a few final thread wraps right back here, right in front of the eye of the hook, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra thread here because I'm going to now reach for my whip finisher and make sure we've got a good knot in place and we don't lose what we have. It's important when you're whip finishing like this to keep tension on that. If you don't keep tension, those wraps you put on before are just going to come off. So I'll be a little bit intentional here as I tie these thread wraps in place. Once I've got them in place, I'm going to pull my thread towards the back end of my vise here, and I'm going to pull it tight, and that will help just kind of make sure that you stick your finger right onto the tip of the hook, because that feels really nice when you get a nice little, get used to it. Yeah, tell me that tying fly is not a dangerous activity. Any activity is dangerous when I'm involved. And so there you have it. There's our flying ant with its wings. It's got the orange and black color like we have around here. Sometimes people will, and I will as well, use a little bit of black deer hair for that last little step there, which will give just the smallest indication of legs sticking out from the bottom. Also help it float up a little bit higher on the water. But that's pretty much it. There's your flying ant.